So I've also been talking in very general terms about how important literacy is. And now I'm going to illustrate this with real-life examples that relate to actual individuals and how big the effects are in Canada. The first one are the equivalent of radioactive half-lives. Instead of looking at radioactive decay, we're looking here at the decay of unemployment. The blue line is high-skilled people, people with level 3, 4, and 5 literacy skills. The red line are level 1 and 2 people. And what we're looking at is once someone gets unemployed, how long does it take people to get reemployed? For skilled people, it takes half of them 9 weeks to get reemployed. So not so long, a couple of weeks without employment and then back into a job. For the low-skilled people, it takes half of them 38 weeks to get back into employment. And so from an individual point of view, you certainly want to be in the level 3, 4, and 5 and not in the level 1 and 2. From a public policy point of view, the costs of the employment insurance system are punishing low-skilled people by keeping them in unemployment by 4 times longer. And from an economic point of view, this is incredibly punishing. The labor market is sorting and selecting people on their skill and leaving the low-skilled behind. Not something we want to interfere with because it's economically efficient, but you have to worry about the impact on low-skilled people as a result. This next chart looks at the impact that skill has on people's wages. So we're able to explain a good part of the differences in what different people earn, and those differences are attributable to the natural things, to people's education levels, to their work experience, and what we see from this chart is their skill level. In fact, in Canada, more of what the differences in people earn is attributable to their average literacy skill than any other country in this display. So 33% of those differences can be traced directly back to differences in literacy skill. So what does this do? People with skill get higher wages, people with lower skill get lower wages. A second thing that this chart reveals is that a country like Sweden, the impact of literacy skill is actually quite low. It explains only 10% of the explainable wage variability in Sweden. This we found to be a paradox because Sweden is the most literate country that we've measured to date, and it has very little variation in literacy skill across the population. So after a little head scratching about the economics of this, what we realized was employers in Sweden aren't idiots. They don't have to pay any wage premiums because everybody has this economically valuable asset of literacy. And so there are wage differences in Sweden, but they go to other things, creativity, that are patently fairer than differences in literacy skill. And finally, there's something about this chart that it actually isn't on the chart. We have data for another country where the impact of literacy on wages is actually bigger than observed in Canada. 43% of wage variation in this country is attributable to literacy skill differences. And that country is the People's Republic of China, which has what, by this standard, the most capitalist, efficient labor market in the world. So the Chinese have a huge supply of education and skill. They also have the market mechanisms to create incentives for individuals to get skill in the first place, and then the tool to apply those skills. And so in competitive terms, we should be absolutely afraid. Were this not bad enough, all of what I've said so far is in the process of being amplified. The diffusion of computer technologies into general life and the production processes at work mean that people that have computer skills get ahead. Computer skills, what this chart looks at is how does your literacy skill level influence the probability that you're going to be a heavy computer user. And at the top of this chart you have Bermuda, where highly literate people, those people in level 4 and 5, are 3.5 times more likely to be heavy computer users than their less literate peers. In Canada, it's about 2.5 times more likely. computer skills are economically productive skills as well. It turns out that they amplify basic literacy differences. Suppose that you're highly literate and a heavy computer user. How much more likely are you to be in a stable, high-wage job? In Switzerland, at the top of this chart, you're 6 times more likely to have one of those desirable jobs. 6 times more likely is really a big effect. In Canada, you're 5 times more likely to be in one of those desirable jobs. So if you're thinking like an individual would, on which side of this skill fence do I want to sit? Oh, I want to be on the high-skilled side. That'll give me access to computer technology that I can trade on the market to get a better job, a higher wage job, and a more stable job. So enough with the labor market side. It's all about economics and earning and employment. There are also huge health effects we've identified. This chart plots for each health region in Canada the incidence rate or prevalence rate of diabetes. Diabetes is one of the most punishing diseases that the health system has to deal with. It eventually kills you. People go blind, they suffer amputation, and it's a terrible disease to manage on a daily basis. Hard on the people that have it, hard on their families. It's also extraordinarily expensive for the health system to deal with in terms of all of the management of the symptoms of the disease. This chart displays the relationship between health literacy, so literacy and numeracy skills applied to health tasks, and the prevalence rate of diabetes in every one of Canada's health regions. And the black line reveals the relationship between these two things. What it says is that the higher the health literacy, the lower the prevalence rate of diabetes. And you see a 5-fold difference between the best health districts and the worst. And so this sets up investments in literacy might lower prevalence rates of diabetes, reduce health costs, reduce the demand on the healthcare system, and therefore reduce pressure on the tax base to fund that treatment. So not only is literacy an economically productive asset for creating goods and services, it also has a huge impact on our health. Having shown how profound an influence literacy skill has on individual labor market outcomes and health outcomes, we're going to turn to have a look at the skill supply that's available in Newfoundland and what the current demand for literacy skill is in the provincial economy. We're going to start by an examination of how the demand for literacy skill has changed over the recent past. This chart plots the jobs that are being destroyed in the economy, which are largely at level 1 and 2, and the jobs that are being created, which are largely jobs at level 3, 4, and 5. So the slope of the black line that runs through the cloud of dots shows that the employment in the province is getting more knowledge and skill intense at quite a rapid rate. So the question becomes, from where is the skill going to come to meet this rising demand? The current distribution of employment by literacy skill level demanded shows up in the right-hand panel. The light yellow box is the proportion of jobs that fall at level 3, which is where we want jobs to be in order to be competitive. And you can see that most jobs in the province fall at that level. There are still a small percentage of level 2 jobs and small percentages of level 4 and 5 jobs, and in fact no jobs at level 1 in the province. If we turn to the left-hand panel, it compares the skill demand in jobs that are held by Aboriginal workers in the province, and we see a different pattern. A larger percentage of level 2 jobs, a much larger percentage of level 3 jobs, and smaller percentages of level 4 jobs and no level 5 jobs. These data imply that Aboriginals will be less likely to be employed, earn less, be exposed to much more unemployment, and have less access to adult education and training. So something that is bad for their health and welfare. If we turn now to the distribution of prose literacy skills in adults 16 years of age and over by proficiency level, we see that The largest number are found at level 3, but an almost equal number at level 2, a significant proportion equal to about 22% of the population at level 1, and much smaller percentages at level 4 and level 5. So those workers, those adults at level 1 and 2, are the people who we believe are at risk in a very competitive global economy. If we turn then to look at the Aboriginal populations in the province, what we see are very large percentages of adults. These are average scores in this case. Non-Aboriginals off reserve have a score almost equal to 270, so on average in level 3. The Aboriginal populations are much less skilled. For Aboriginals living off reserve, you're looking at an average score of about 251, about 253 for band members living off reserve, and band members living on reserve are a little less than 245. So Aboriginal populations of each variety are at serious risk in the Newfoundland labour market. So if the levels are bad now, we wanted to have a sense of how they're likely to change in the future. Canada and Newfoundland are investing heavily in education, and one would hope that things would get better with time. The left-hand chart plots what we expect to be the evolution of the skill profile out to 2016. It shows that the numbers of level 1 and 2 people are likely to fall over the coming decade, but the numbers of level 3, 4, and 5 are going to remain about stable. If we look at the right-hand chart, it shows that the proportion of people with level 1 and 2 skills, remember that those are the people we think who are at risk, will stay roughly stable at about 45%, coming down a little bit, but not much. So 4 out of every 10 workers in the province have skills below something that we think is optimal for global competitiveness. This chart looks at, by jurisdiction, how much of the skills of Aboriginals the economy uses in that labour market. At the Canada level, things are almost in balance. So almost 100% of the literacy skills that Aboriginals possess is being put to good economic use. The situation differs a lot from province to province. The provinces and territories at the top of this chart are all in literacy skill shortage. The worst is Newfoundland and Labrador that have almost a 4.5% shortage, where they don't have skills for the current jobs. At the other end of the spectrum is the Yukon economy, where the current jobs are only making use of about 96% of the available supply. What this chart implies is a need to tailor a policy response that's unique to the supply and demand conditions of the individual provinces and territories.